Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'll be recapping the election results for the 2025 New York City Mayoral Race, and what an interesting race this was, and to cover both in the primary and now in the general election. Bottom line, Democrat Zohran Mamdani completes the race after defeating Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa in the general election, albeit by a little bit of a smaller margin than I was initially expecting, but Zohran Mamdani getting the win and breaking 50% of the vote, getting an outright majority in the New York City mayoral race. So let's break this all down. Last night, if you saw the live stream that I did recapping the election results, firstly, thank you so much for doing so. I had a lot of fun doing it. It was a lot of fun to do, and I'm glad everyone was able to come out and watch the results come in at live, or in the moment, obviously. Zohran Mamdani, the Democrat, won the primary election back, obviously, in June, and he did so upsetting the former Democratic governor and, as he said in his victory speech, political dynasty of the Cuomo family, Andrew Cuomo. His dad was the former governor of New York. I saw a post online that made reference to the fact that Andrew Cuomo's father famously ran for a comeback mayoral bid of New York City against, I believe, the mayor Ed Koch, I believe his name was, Koch is how it's spelled. And he actually lost to Koch in the general election in a third-party bid. Cuomo's father did, by the exact margin of 50 to 41 that Mamdani defeated Cuomo by. Now, Andrew Cuomo was the, I believe, two-term governor of New York who had to resign halfway through his term due to the scandals that were surrounding him. And he was hoping to run for mayor of New York City and start his political career back up again, winning this race. Now, Zohran Mamdani runs the primary campaign, defeats Andrew Cuomo, and goes on to become the Democratic nominee. And what becomes is a lot of Democrats, independents, and Republicans end up rallying behind Andrew Cuomo, running as an independent to try and stop Zohran Mamdani from becoming the next mayor of New York City. Now, early on in this race, it became very apparent that in a more than two-person race, Zohran Mamdani could not be stopped. With Curtis Sliwa and Eric Adams in the race at the time, there was just not enough votes out there for Andrew Cuomo to catch Zohran Mamdani. Now, Sliwa does only end up getting 7.1% of the vote across all of New York after he got roughly 27% or so back in 2021, and in large part due to the fact of a lot of Republicans saying they like Curtis Sliwa, they want to vote for Curtis Sliwa, but they would rather not have Mamdani as mayor than vote for him. So they voted for Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo outperforms his polling numbers by a pretty sizable amount in this race. Overall, when you look at how it broke down, the polling level, Zohran Mamdani was getting 45.7%, Andrew Cuomo was getting around 31%, and Curtis Sliwa was getting about 17.3%. Overall, a lead of about 14 points, 14.7% to be precise, for Mamdani over Cuomo. Now, the final poll in this race from Atlas Intel showed a more competitive race of about a 7-point lead for Mamdani over Cuomo. And at the time, that was kind of looked at as, wait, is the race really going to be that close? The percentages were certainly off because it had Sliwa getting 24%, 34 for Cuomo, and 41 for Mamdani. But in terms of the overall vote by victory margins, Mamdani winning by around 9% showed a more competitive race than perhaps initially expected. Now, Mamdani ended up getting 50.4% across all of New York and its boroughs, Cuomo 41.6%, Sliwa only 7.1%. So Sliwa lost about 10% of his support, and a large part could have been the fact that President Trump and Elon Musk both sent out social media posts saying to vote for Andrew Cuomo if you support them, because you don't want to see Mamdani be the next mayor of New York. So a lot of Republicans and even some independents did that. But still, Zohran Mamdani won. Now, what happened on this map? Staten Island, which is usually a very Republican area, ended up voting for Andrew Cuomo, 55%. Mamdani came in second with 23%, but Curtis Sliwa still got 21% of the vote. Pretty sizable number there. So Staten Island was the only borough in New York City to vote for Andrew Cuomo. Now, in Brooklyn was a very heavy Democratic area. It voted for Zohran Mamdani, 57 to 37 over Andrew Cuomo. Curtis Sliwa only got 5% of the vote there. That was certainly a very, very big win for that one there, and for Zohran Mamdani. Now, back in the primary, it was interesting to look at because Andrew Cuomo also won Staten Island in the primary over Zohran Mamdani, 46 to 38. So that did carry over to the general. In Brooklyn, Mamdani defeated Cuomo 49 to 31 in that race. That also carried over to the general. Now, one thing that was interesting was Queens. Queens was pretty competitive in the primary, 46% for Mamdani, 38% for Cuomo. And I've also, while watching the analysis, learned that both Cuomo and Mamdani do technically come from Queens. This is both technically their home base of support. Obviously, different parts of Queens. Queens is a very large borough, but their home support does come from the same borough of Queens, which led to the closest result of the night, where Zohran Mamdani ended up winning 47% of the vote in Queens to Andrew Cuomo's 42%, Curtis Sliwa getting 10% of the vote. So overall, a very close competitive matchup in Queens, and one, quite frankly, I did not see coming. I thought that Manhattan was going to be the closest, and maybe the Bronx as well, but Queens ended up being the closest of all the boroughs. Now let's talk about Manhattan itself. Oftentimes when people think of New York City, one of the first things that pops into their mind is the borough of Manhattan and all the people living there, all the skyscrapers and such. How did Manhattan vote? It voted for Zohran Mamdani 53 to 43, a 10-point lead for Mamdani over Cuomo. And this is very significant because, as I mentioned, all the people who live there. There are a lot of Wall Street people living there, a lot of wealthy people living there, financial districts, but also a lot of regular New Yorkers who live there as well, who likely see their rents being very high and voting for Zohran Mamdani potentially for a large reason of that. And ultimately, Mamdani defeats Andrew Cuomo in Manhattan 53 to 43, Curtis Sliwa getting only 3% of the vote. That is very significant. In terms of how competitive this race was going to be, it was more a situation of could Cuomo get Mamdani under 50% of the vote, and does he have a chance to get to that margin? If Mamdani only was getting 46, 47%, maybe there would have been a path for Cuomo. But with Sliwa in the race taking votes away, it just was not going to be a possibility. But with Zohran Mamdani breaking 50% of the vote outright, it may ultimately have not mattered if Sliwa was not in this race. If Cuomo won every non-Mamdani vote, he would only get up to 49.6%. It would not be enough, or 49.6%. It would not be enough for Cuomo to win. He would have needed some of those Mamdani votes to go to him in that head-to-head matchup, which obviously probably would not have happened. So that was Manhattan. And lastly, the Bronx ended up being a 12-point victory, 52 to 40 for Mamdani over Cuomo, Sliwa getting 7. This race is very interesting and very, very fascinating, especially when you consider that New York City usually doesn't have too much of a competitive race. Last time around in 2021, we got Eric Adams versus Curtis Sliwa, and it was a blowout, 67.4, 27.9. This was a Democrat versus a Republican in New York City, one of the most Democratic areas in all of New York. Now, Staten Island voted red, as it obviously usually would. Brooklyn voted blue, 71-23. Queens voted blue, 60-35. Manhattan voted blue, 81-14. Bronx voted blue, 76-20.5. The race being Mamdani versus Cuomo made it more interesting because you're essentially having two Democrats running against each other, but two very different Democrats. Zohran Mamdani represents the new generation of Democrats, the AOC, the Bernie Sanders, the farther left, Democratic, openly embracing democratic socialism and moving the party further to the left. That's the type of Democrat Zohran Mamdani is. Where Andrew Cuomo represents the old guard, the establishment Democrats, the Democrats of the Hillary Clintons, the Bill Clintons, the Democratic Party of the 90s, the early 2000s, the 2010s. Those are the Democrats that Andrew Cuomo represents. And the Democratic primary sort of became a little bit of a proxy war of that, where Mamdani and Cuomo faced off, and Mamdani won, and by a lot, by about 13 points. Now it goes to the general election, where you would actually think Cuomo maybe has a little bit of a better chance, where there'll be more independents and more Republicans voting in that one. And ultimately, by the results, he did. He went from losing by 13 points when everything was said and done in the Democratic primary. Cuomo ends up losing by about 9 points. So he did ultimately do better in the general election running as an independent than he did in the Democratic primary. But running an independent bid against Zohran Mamdani, even with the last name Cuomo on the ticket, was still not enough, considering there was Curtis Sliwa in the race pulling votes away from Cuomo, which certainly hurt his chances, but also the fact that among a lot of New York voters, especially a lot of younger New York voters, Zohran Mamdani was just popular enough and people and voters wanted change. How else can you explain Zohran Mamdani breaking 50% of the vote in a race where there's a former governor, a newcomer, and the Republican nominee for mayor from 2021? Mamdani broke 50% of the vote outright, which the polls did not really show in the final few days and final few weeks of the campaign. They showed Mamdani around 44, 45, 46%, but he didn't break 50% in a lot of these polls in this three-way matchup. Now, when everything was said and done, he broke 50% at 50.4. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking on this race, saying if Curtis Sliwa dropped out of the race earlier, maybe that would have given the opportunity for Andrew Cuomo to win. And maybe it would have, maybe it wouldn't have, but one thing you can't deny, Zohran Mamdani broke 50% of the vote outright. So based on these election results that we got, even if Andrew Cuomo won every non-Mamdani vote, he still would have lost, because Mamdani got a lot of voters, especially a lot of younger voters, a lot of independent voters, to turn out for him, likely on the policies of wanting change, of wanting something different, of wanting more affordable housing, issues very important to New Yorkers, wanting more affordable groceries and such. He was able to get a large amount of people to turn out and vote for him, and ended up winning by about 9 points. Now, this is important. There's 91% of the votes in, so there's still 9% left to go. So it's possible these margins may shift ultimately a point or two once all the votes come in from these current numbers that I have here. But for this race, Zohran Mamdani is the next mayor of New York City. He is a Democrat, and it's going to be a very interesting 4 years, because how he does could have very important ramifications for the Democrats moving forward, both for 2026 and potentially for 2028. Does the party go further to the left nationally in a lot of other states? Do we see more Democrats like Zohran Mamdani run against Democratic incumbents, maybe for House or Senate or governor? Does that happen? Does Zohran Mamdani himself, you have to consider this possibility. Mamdani is going to be public enemy number one against President Trump and the Trump administration. He's representing the city that Donald Trump grew up in. If he goes at the president every single day in the media, is there going to be Zohran Mamdani 2028 possibility? Is Mamdani going to want to run for president in 2028? Do Democrats want to see him run for president in 2028 if something like that happens? Obviously, he just won a mayoral race, so it's a little bit far-fetched to think about that now. But those conversations come 2027 may be happening, especially if New York City voters end up liking the job he's doing as mayor. So Mamdani winning is a very fascinating scenario. I am a little bit interested in what happens with Andrew Cuomo now, because Cuomo has run as a Democrat for mayor and lost. He's run an independent bid for mayor and lost. Does he actually essentially retire, go out? This is his last race, go out quietly. In the concession speech that Cuomo made, it didn't really sound like he wanted to go out. It sounds like he wants to run. He wants to get back in the political game. He wants to hold office again. But if it's New York City mayor, if he wants to run against Mamdani, he's going to have to wait another 4-year term for him to run against him. But Cuomo is going to be interesting to watch. Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below if you think of Mamdani or Cuomo have any future political ambition, if they are going to run for anything else, or if you think they're kind of ending here. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts. Again, thank you so much for watching this video and for watching the live stream last night. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoyed these videos that I've done for you. I also recapped the governor's races in New Jersey and the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general's race in Virginia as well. Make sure to go check those out. Also, I'll be doing a video in the coming days about California Proposition 50 and the impacts that could have on the 2026 U.S. House map. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video.